I would say they took a gamble on me. A guy from Wales who probably didn't know his arse from his elbow, to be truthful. I've had the opportunity to have my work shown on CBS and Fox and Sky Sports F1, and it's enough for me to tell the grandkids. I commune with Alex Jakes from time to time, and he's been wonderful for me. And so is David Croft. I've had the odd conversation, like the odd brief social media chat, which has been quite nice. I remember my first meeting with the International GT Open, and I didn't think that they were going to take me on at all. Because I only had a sim racing background. I thought there's no way a sim racing commentator is going to get over in real life motorsport. I thought to myself, and I actually left the meeting. I thought there's no way that it's not going to happen. And then they turned around and said, right, you've got a full championship next year. I was like, no. So told me the list of places I'd be going to, and I was like, no. I'm delighted to say that I commentated on Andrea Kimi Antonelli, last year, who I have to tell you, I've never interviewed a driver like him. You'd look at him in the paddock, tender age of 16 years old, and he would have almost like a steel-like demeanor. He is pure championship material, and this is the kind of thing we can put across. This is a guy who's been born and bred to be a Formula One driver. I can consider myself somewhat fortunate in a way because I got to do the F1 Sim Racing Championship. That was a huge moment. Never give up. If you're passionate, if you love it, somehow great things can happen.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Georgie's Stripping the Dipping podcast. I'm your host, F1 Blag. And you know what? How many of us can say we're living our dreams? Well, certainly this week's guest can. From the age of 4, George Morgan was an avid motorsport fan. In fact, he can tell you exactly when it was that he first clocked eyes on the sport. So perhaps it's not a complete coincidence that today George is a commentator on GT racing, single-seaters and sim racing. But let's just say his journey to where he is today, calling the action at some of the world's most iconic circuits, has been a little unorthodox. This is an episode we've been looking forward to for quite some time. So, George Morgan, welcome to the show.
Yes, it's long awaited, but I'm so excited for this.
Brilliant. Well, look, lovely to have you. The first question we ask all of our guests is, if you were to introduce yourself, I don't know, someone that didn't know you, imagine you're talking to any one of our listeners, how would you do that?
That's a very, very good question to start things off. But I suppose really, just to introduce myself, I suppose I'm a young, well, I say young man. I'm 32 years of age now from South Wales in the UK. Brought up pretty much on motorsport since the age of 4. Came into it right from the get-go. Was inspired by Murray Walker immensely. I just thought he was, a maestro at what he did, and that pretty much set up the front for what is my career today. Pretty much, I fell into it by accident, totally. But I think that's something we can obviously divulge and look into through the course of this podcast. But the one thing that I think the viewers can take from me is I'm quite energetic, quite excitable. I love what I do. We'll deep dive into that, I think.
That's great. And talking about energy and Murray Walker in the same sort of sentence, I think that's what he could really get across. So you're talking about your first memories when you were 4. I mean, my first motorsport memory, I was 8. So why do you think that really stuck with you at such a young age? And do you remember exactly what it was?
I do remember it exactly, and I keep touting it. It's my first memory of watching Formula One. I might well have watched it beforehand because obviously what I used to do was watch sport on television with my father sat next to me. So it'd be, both of us, it'd be like grandstand on the weekend. Obviously, it was huge. And then at the same time, Formula One was on earlier on, so we would have obviously qualifying on the Saturday, and then obviously you tune in on the Sunday for the race. But I remember distinctly the "I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat" line that Murray said. I was in love with Murray Walker when I was a kid, right from the off. I don't know what it was, whether it was his energy, it just resonated. The voice is obviously, it's Murray type thing, so it kind of sticks with you. I think there's not a commentator alive who probably, is inspired by him. And at the same time, Damon Hill was my favourite driver. So for him to go on to win a world championship that year was huge, especially off the back of what happened between he and Schumacher years prior. So, it was. Yeah, it was quite a surreal moment. So yeah, and the Rothmans livery is always my favourite livery where it comes to the Williams team. I think it's one of my favourite all-time Formula One liveries.
Well, we're going to get on because I think that's my childhood experience of Formula One as well. That livery, that commentary, and
Yeah,
Damon Hill. I think he had the whole country behind him. And it's probably difficult for people to realise. Back then, yes, okay, you probably could have had Sky or cable, but most people, or most people where I lived, had 4 channels. Maybe it got to 5 by that
yeah.
point. And so there was very limited options for what you're going to watch. And so if the Japanese Grand Prix was on, it was probably at some time in the morning. It's probably what most people were watching. And it was a huge moment when he won the championship. So did you think you wanted to be a commentator there and then? You said you sort of loved Murray, or did you also have other thoughts about what you wanted to be?
I'll be honest. I don't think I ever thought it was possible back then. I mean, I was brought up to be a bit of a realist. Don't really believe in fairies too much. Kind of get into a line of work that is just fundamental. You go to school. I mean, when I went through school, I wanted to be an estate agent, to be honest with you, which is quite baffling to say. But yeah, I mean, I grew up and in school, whilst obviously I love sport, I played football as well. I loved racing, but obviously my father, because he was a self-employed property developer at the time, is business. Don't get me wrong, he was trying to get it off the ground. We didn't have any money spare to go and fund a racing career or anything like that. But for me, watching sport on the weekend was everything, and we played football. Basically, football was a good cheap avenue to play sport because you pay £15 for a set of football boots, £5 for a pair of shin pads, and you can play every weekend. But it's just a lot of it. It's like barrier to entry. You don't think it's possible. Television was seen like the hierarchy back then. It didn't seem like a possibility. What really did it for me was exposure to the F1 game. Obviously, when I got into that and then eventually doing league racing broadcasting, because simply I was too slow as a driver. I was about 2 seconds off the pace from all my friends. We used to get together on a Friday night. They would blow me away in pace, and I would just I just turn around to them and say, listen, this isn't working out. And they'll say to me, they said, George, get in the commentary box, do some commentary on these races. So I thought, well, okay, well, I'll give it a go. No harm in trying. We would only have like one viewer on YouTube, for example. But very quickly I started finding my feet, and I was like, wow, I actually really enjoy this. This is actually, good fun. I was only about 26 at the time. So we're going back quite a few years. But very quickly from there, it kind of jettisoned. In about a year's time, I was commentating on the top F1 sim racing drivers in the world, and after that, it just kind of progressed onwards, and eventually, I got taken on by an agency, and it just kind of flourished. I honestly, it's one of the most bizarre stories I think anyone could probably be told. Honestly, it gets me every time. And I don't think I'm the only one either. There's quite a few, I think, who have found it like that too.
It's funny that you said you were raised to be a bit of a realist. And then you said, I don't know, the way you described that, well, it just sort of happened. Clearly, there's something about you, your voice, the energy you bring, the passion that caught the eye or caught the ear, should we say. So do you ever, I don't know, have the chance to go back and hear what you sounded like when you were first doing commentary? And how would you say, I mean, I don't want to trigger you because, I'm sure it would be the same for all of us. How would you say you've changed? What were the lessons you learned in that first year?
Believe it or not, I've calmed down a lot. I think from the first time. I remember the first broadcast. It was like 100 miles an hour, 24/7, really, when I started. So I didn't really have an off switch, which probably my voice box probably didn't thank me too much back then. But I never lost it. But it was just kind of like, just you sort of learn to pace yourself as time goes on. You get to a point where you start actually looking into the science of it, but you do that sort of unknowingly. The more you broadcast, the more experience you get. You pace yourself. You kind of pick your moments. I mean, everything I do is off the cuff. It's all, a natural reaction. And it took a while for it to settle down. You've got to almost pump the brakes a little bit, pull up the reins, and just, just steady on, in certain areas, and you just become more experienced with it, as time goes on. It's it's like anything, when you're practiced at something. Bear in mind, I was commentating league racing every week, sometimes even 5 to 7 times a week. So you get a lot of broadcast time in. I remember one year it was a 5 to 6 day a week, so I do my 9 to 5 job, come back, and then do say 3 hours of broadcasting every night. So it was like and it was all free. I didn't charge or anything. I never charged. I just did it for fun. I still do it for fun sometimes as well. When I can. But yeah, I mean, it's good. I've got a passion for it clearly, and I enjoy it. I love it, and I think that's what really keeps me going.
Well, don't tell your agent that you would do it for free.
No,
We'll cut that out. It's fine.
Yeah. I'm a passionate person. That's what I'll say.
Yes, exactly. Good. Fine. So, you talked about picking your moments and learning. Are there words that you or others would describe your style with? Is there something you've become after these years, your style?
Yeah, I'd say definitely high energy. I think there's you can tell. I think in certain definitely tell that Murray Walker's had an impression on me. But I also have been exposed to various other commentators in other lines of sport as well, like football with John Motson. I thought he was brilliant. Peter O'Sullivan in horse racing. I thought he was fabulous. Sid Waddell in darts. I thought he was sensational. And a real linguist. He could pull words out of absolutely nowhere that you wouldn't even fathom would make sense, but they somehow do. But yeah, it's guys like that who are just experienced diehards in the business. I must say I'm a big fan as well of the likes of David Croft and Alex Jakes at the moment. I think they're both fabulous. I'm quite privileged to actually know Alex Jakes, and I commune with Alex Jakes from time to time, and he's been wonderful for me, and so is David Croft. I've had the odd conversation, like the odd brief social media chat, which has been quite nice. And but yeah, it's fabulous. I've been quite fortunate, I think, in my era of sport to be exposed to a wonderful collective of brilliant commentators.
I'm just imagining this little secret WhatsApp group of, like motorsport commentators or motorsport anchors, because I guess all the people you're describing are what I guess the Americans would call the play-by-play, and then there's another person doing the color.
Correct.
But you do both, right? I guess.
No. I'm a play-by-play. I'm not a color commentator. The color commentator is generally reserved for the experienced professional who spent time in the seats. So a bit like your Martin Brundle, for example, who was a former driver. They're able to sort of tap into some of the nuances that only drivers would probably know as such. I mean, don't get me wrong, on the sim racing side, I can impart maybe a little bit of wisdom, but probably not as much as the likes of Jarno Opmeer would probably be able to dish out, or a Brendan Lee, for example. But it's strictly play-by-play for me, I would say. Just call the action as I see it, and update the audience as best I can.
Fascinating. And so you said the science of commentary a couple of answers ago. So I've got a couple of questions trying to hint at what the science might be, and you could tell us in your own words what you think it is. So clearly, you commentate on a range of series, different cars, different engine notes, sim racing and live racing. Does your commentary style change to the series that you're sort of commenting on, or do you think it stays roughly the same?
It's actually pretty similar, to be honest. I would say the only difference really is that, especially in the world of F1 sim racing, it's quite intense. Probably you're more likely to have more intense moments in the world of F1 sim racing or sim racing in general than you are in real life as such, because the grids can be fairly far and few between. And obviously you have the elements of, say, G-force that's applied in real life motorsport, which the sim racers don't feel. So they're able to go, 120, 24/7, they can really, lump it. Whereas you've got so many variables in real life motorsport that kind of get in between and obviously can cause gaps to fill. So, it really, I suppose they are similar in many ways, but I would say with real life motorsport, it's a different challenge in a sense that you have to be, I think, a little bit more informative. I think you need to almost apply a bit more of a knowledgeable aspect to your commentary, in a sense that you perhaps have to deep dive into some of the drivers' histories, get your notes out. It's the preparation is where your money's made. That's where that's where you do it. So it's very much it's the work you put in leading up to the weekend that makes the difference in the real motorsport world. You do have to be prepared as well for sim racing, but at the same time, the opportunities to use the notes you've probably utilized are very far and few between when there's overtakes being made left, right, and center as such. So it's just a different style of racing, really.
That's really interesting, the preparation. And we know that Murray Walker used to do a heck of a lot of preparation and stick it to the side of his com box. And we had on the show last series, virtual statman, Sean Kelly, who
Yes,
basically provides his preparation or at a fee, passionate, but not that passionate, to many broadcasters around the world. So the other thing then you mentioned is the excitement and I guess tension that happens in sim racing. Do you ever find yourself not having another level to go to? Like, so you've picked a pitch and a cadence that you're hitting. Do you always need to keep something in reserve in case it gets more exciting?
Yeah, and I probably need to do that more often, to be honest. I think if I'm quite honest, I probably don't do that enough. But yeah, I mean, you're spot on. I think obviously you need to be prepared for what could come next. But to be honest with you, this is what I mean. It's totally 100% natural and off the cuff. Every commentator's the same. Sometimes you get to a point you just don't know what's around the corner with certain moments out on track, and I think that's the beauty of it. I think is you get those snap moments, and all of a sudden you're tasked with trying to. Well, I mean, you're not trying to. You're just responding to what you're seeing as such. There's no way you can really force it and get it over with the audience. At the end of the day, you've got to be 100% natural, I would say, all the time. But yeah, it's tough. There are times where you can sort of go and have nowhere else to go, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it does help if you can kind of steady the ship and then open up when needs must. But sometimes little matters can occur that are out of your hands.
No, I completely get it. And, thinking about famous celebrities, I think David Beckham insured his right foot for, back in the 90s, the rumours were millions of pounds. There are other maybe models that secured particular body parts. How about you and your voice box, your larynx? Have you ever thought about getting it insured?
I never have, but that's a very, very good point. I might have to look into it. I've never really thought about it, to be honest. But yeah, maybe. I mean, at the end of the day, it is paying for the mortgage at the moment, so I suppose maybe it should. But I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's a skill, and it's something that I've developed in time, and I could never have fathomed that this would have been a career, years ago. When Loudspeaker Agency got in touch with me in 2022, well, 2021 it was at the time, in September, they turned around to me and said, we would like a meeting, and we ended up sitting down, and they just said, listen, we really like what you do, and we want to push you out to real life motorsport and clients. And eventually they did. And I remember my first meeting with the International GT Open, and I didn't think that they were going to take me on at all. Because I only had a sim racing background. I thought there's no way a sim racing commentator is going to get over in real life motorsport. I thought to myself, and I actually left the meeting. I thought there's no way that it's not going to happen. And then they turned around and said, right, you've got a full championship next year. I was like, no. So told me the list of places I'd be going to, and I was like, no. It's impossible. And it just goes to show it is possible. And I honestly think it's obviously the voice is important, etc., but I think also it's everything else as well. There's so many pieces to it. I think on top of that, I mean, nowadays you have to be on the ball with social media. There's also having the ability to speak to drivers, and I think also having a collective of skills behind you also helps. So whilst obviously the voice is useful, there's so many other things that you need to really take you there.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess if we're drawing the analogy to being a recording artist, you're not just performing the songs, you're writing them, because you've got to know, what you're going to say, what you're going to talk about. So it's interesting that it was 2021, and that leads me to wonder if you think the kind of COVID lockdowns had an impact on that sort of jump in your career, because of course, probably 2020-ish, nothing was more high profile in the motorsport world than sim racing and the esports side of it, because that's all we had. So do you think there was an element there, and also perhaps attracting the youth audience that does tend to watch sim racing?
Yeah, and actually, I can give you numbers to support it, because when we were with well, obviously I do commentary for PSGL as well, which is the F1 League I'm part of. I've been there now since 2021. All the top guys from F1 Sim Racing are in the league. And when I arrived there, they only had 400 subscribers on YouTube. That was all they had. At the moment, we're on the cusp, I believe, of hitting 50K now, which is what we've managed to achieve in the last 4 years, which I think is quite an achievement. But a lot of that was done in the course of COVID. It was basically heightened. The viewership increased season on season as we made our way through. F1 Sim Racing was put on the map. There was actually some funny occasions where we actually outscored F1 Sim Racing on the viewership, which was quite funny. And we used to celebrate every night after doing that. It was great. But yeah, no, it's great as a collective, because if one echelon of the scene prevails, then it lifts everybody. It's a rising tide lifts all ships. That's the thing, and I think it's in a wonderful place at the moment. Obviously, I would imagine the growth will settle down now. Obviously, with COVID now being a thing of the past, thank God, touch wood. It's still gonna, I think, grow leaps and bounds, because it's already come such a long way, and we're dipping into technology nowadays that is vastly pushing the range up, I would say, at this time.
No, absolutely, and it got me thinking, because you talked about the different, I guess, seasons of the league you're in, and then I was thinking in my head, yes, because during COVID, people were looking for content, right? The Tiger King example, not to compare to Tiger King, but that sort of stuff on Netflix. And so one of the criticisms, I suppose, that you see online about commentators is that they have a narrative. It happens in Formula One all the time. It seems like they're purposefully trying to tell a story, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you don't like that story, maybe you disagree. So in your job, do you sometimes see it as your role to bring the characters of the drivers out and to tell a bit of a story that lasts maybe not just through the race, but then race to race?
You've basically perfectly described the commentator's job. So that is essentially what we're there to do. On top of, obviously, telling the story of the race itself. Obviously, it's nice to give a background as to where these drivers, for example, have come from. So we'll dip down into some of the knowledge we've procured. Obviously, this is where your notes are useful, and also if you've worked with the drivers in any previous series, you're able to sort of dish out their accomplishments over a period of time. I mean, I'm delighted to say that I commentated on Andrea Kimi Antonelli, last year, who I have to tell you, I've never interviewed a driver like him. I have to be honest. When I was in the paddock with him last year, he won quite a number of races, as you probably imagine. I think won 5 junior championship titles in the space of 2 years, which was absolutely unbelievable. A phenomenal record. But you'd look at him in the paddock, tender age of 16 years old, and he would have almost like a steel-like demeanor, but would talk so well, and so I would say, as if he was a mature sim racer that had been doing it for years. He's got the knowledge and all of that. And these are the types of stories we can tell the audience, and things like that. Dip into those accomplishments that he has made, but also his persona, his ideology. And I tell you what, looking at him, he is pure championship material. And this is the kind of thing we can put across. This is a guy who has been born and bred to be a Formula One driver. He came into it at a tender age, all kicked off in karting. That was his tapestry. He's painting on further canvases now in other series, and he's going to be a true artist in Formula One. That's for sure. I think. Just watch his space, and this is the type of thing we like to do. We obviously, we don't blasé anything. What we're saying is true. It's just we're pushing it to the audience and just painting that picture. Just telling that story.
Absolutely, and let's jump around in the script a little bit, because our listeners should know, or they do know, now that you commentate on the Formula Regional European Championship by Alpine, and we'll talk about the by Alpine bit in a bit. And so, you had Kimi Antonelli as your champion. It's crazy to think it was last season, right? Because he's kind of doing, why do I want to say F3000? He's doing F2 this year, and he's already got his seat in Mercedes sort of guaranteed for next season. So you mentioned there was something different about him. Do you have that confidence in him that perhaps Toto has, that he could be this future world champion? Do you have a sort of certainty there, or a big hope?
Well, I was really blown away when I was in the paddock. Obviously, Chris McCarthy is the usual commentator at Formula Regional. I tend to step in when he was doing the Formula 3 Championship. So I went in to cover him. Chris is a lovely guy. I've travelled with him numerous times. And both me and him used to rave about Kimi and his raw abilities behind the wheel. He was astonishing. Honestly, I used to walk around the paddock. I mean, I had the benefit of watching him in Italian F4, because Italian F4 was a support series for many of the GT Open races that we do, and he would start sometimes 6th on the grid, in say a qualifying reverse scenario or something, and he would pick apart the field in no less than 2 laps. He was just unbelievable. You'd walk around the paddock, and whilst he was racing for Prema, there would be a huge Mercedes entourage around him. So whether Prema actually had a say in any of his developments, I'm not sure, because they were all Mercedes people that were working with him. And to be fair, that the head of the Mercedes Academy, her time was pretty much dedicated to Kimi. He was, obviously he was that important to them, I think, as a future star for their team. But yeah, he's going to be a phenomenal talent. I have true belief that he's going to, shake things up. I remember seeing, obviously he had that big crash at Monza. I think that obviously turned a few heads, a few people perhaps saying, oh, is this another case of a driver brought up too soon? It's not too soon. I think if anything, he's going to take a lot of learning from that experience of hitting that barrier, and I think he'll come back stronger, personally.
He seems like he's on a growth or a learning curve, and naturally, to learn, you have to test your limits. So we'll see. And George Russell, maybe the tables have turned. You're no longer the youthful teammate.
Well, Christian Horner's on about tapping him up now.
Well, that's probably him on a wind-up, which is, he's been enjoying that this season, and probably many more before. So you mentioned GT Open or International GT Open, and you talked a bit about going from sim racing and getting the job. Often when we think we've messed up the exam, we get a good grade, What were some of the circuits that you were given on that list, and where would you think your favourite place to commentate is?
Well, I think my favourite one, only just because it was my first one that I did, was Estoril in Portugal. And it still has the old grid boxes. You'd swear you'd walked into the 1970s there, honestly. They still have the original concrete grid, like pit boxes, which is fabulous. It's like stepping back in time. But it's honestly, I did a track walk around there on my first weekend, and it was fabulous. All the circuits are Grand Prix tracks. So you've got Monza, for example. I'm there this weekend. Barcelona. You've got Red Bull Ring. Paul Ricard. All the top circuits that you see in Formula One, for example. Portimao, which hosts the Algarve Grand Prix. It's sensational, and the level of racing. I mean, compare GT Open to where it was when I first joined back in 2022, we've pretty much near enough doubled the number of drivers. The quality has stepped up. Many of the drivers who compete in GT World Challenge come across and do weekends there as well. We've got a fabulous GT Cup Open Europe Championship as well, which I also commentate on, which is, I would say, is tripled in size in terms of grid, and with great teams joining. We've now got several different manufacturers, Ferrari, Porsche, as well as even Lamborghinis from time to time that take part in that, and Aston Martins. And in Euroformula, obviously we've got budding stars of the future. I've had the opportunity this season of commentating on Rubens Barrichello's son this year, which is fabulous. And he's actually racing Rubens himself in GT Open this weekend for the first time. So I'm really excited about that at Monza, where he has a lot of history, and he's actually racing for a team that he actually started with in F3000 many years ago. So it's quite a nice story to tell, which I'm sure I'll bring that up on the broadcast this weekend. I consider myself very fortunate. I've met so many different people. I met Nick de Vries, for example, who was in the paddock one time. I've met many. He was looking after Lawrence Van Hoopen in the FRECA paddock. many other fantastic individuals. Ollie Goethe and Christian Mansell were two of my first drivers from Euroformula back in 2022. They're both now moving up into Formula 2. I still stay in touch with them, and they're fabulous. I've got an open invitation from Ollie Goethe to go down to a museum his father owns down in Hampshire, which is a collection of the Golf liveries, because they have the Rothko collection down there, which is like successful cars they've had in the past that have been, successful at like Le Mans or in motorsport in general. They've got huge numbers of cars. And I said, well, I hope Ollie's Euroformula car from 2022 is going to be in there, because that is a championship winning car. But yeah, no, it's fabulous. Honestly, it's I consider myself honestly so fortunate to do it and to see the world like I do. I basically went from someone who has never flown by himself to all of a sudden flying to all these places. So it was kind of a 0 to 100 situation, if you get me.
Obviously, it's your skill and it's your art form, but you've definitely got me rooting for you, and I'm sure our listeners. So it's lovely to hear that. And some of the circuits you were describing there, I don't know why, I just had that picture of, I don't know, them on a sunny day, lovely crisp grass and so on. So look, we're assured that you're a humble, modest guy, but let's pretend that you're kind of demanding, right? Rock stars will often demand, or sometimes will demand, their blue M&M or blue Smartie. So what is it in a commentary box that you want, and what is it in a commentary box that if you turn up and it's like that, you're going to be annoyed?
Well, as long as we've got a microphone in there, I think that helps. I honestly, that's all I need. I must say, I'm probably one of the most easygoing guys in the world. I mean, very rarely do we find, prima donna commentators. To be honest, we're quite simple human beings, I think, really. But I mean, I have to say, I've never once. I mean, I've had stuff given to me. I mean, I remember once I was booked on a business flight to Abu Dhabi, going back a couple of years ago, because I was working on V10R League, and I actually had the opportunity then to work with Lewis Hamilton's brother Nick, who was fantastic. We worked together in London, and I worked with Hayden Gullis and Steph Wentworth and Tom Deacon as well. And then eventually we had the grand final in Ferrari World Abu Dhabi. But they put me in business class, and honestly, I didn't know I was born. I got in there, and all of a sudden you've got a TV screen, you've got your closable thing, you've got meals, 3 square meals throughout the flight. You had a massage chair, and I kept on turning to Hayden Gullis, and I said, "Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do?" And he said, "Yes." He's like, "Yes, do it." It's like, yeah, they're not going to charge me for this, are they? I'm like, I just didn't know. It just goes to show. I mean, I'm a young, I was a young kid that was brought up from South Wales. We weren't really exposed to an awful lot. I came from a village background, grew up, went to a village primary school, went to a local comprehensive, studied at the local university for 3 months and then quit, and then went to work for my grandfather. So, it was, I lived a very caged lifestyle, really. It wasn't until I really saw the UK when I started a band with my best mate, and we started touring the UK, and those were my first echelons of travel before everything else. So there was quite there's been a journey.
You've taken us down another angle really quickly here. So tell us a little bit about your band. I mean, you don't have to say the name, because we're all going to be Googling your MySpace if you do that. But like, what instrument, or were you on vocals, obviously, and what sort of music did you play?
Well, we were into I must say, obviously pop punk was huge, as well as I was into U2. Still am. But yeah, I was in a band called Thousand Fingers, which was a melodic alternative rock band. We toured 3 times. We played the O2 Academy 3 times as well. We headlined the O2 in Birmingham once. It was a May show back in 2000 and I want to say 2013, I think. But yeah, we played a show there, which was fantastic. It was brilliant. I didn't actually know how to play bass. I played bass for the band. Because what happened was my mate Charlie Whaley, who was actually best man at my wedding a couple of years ago as well. We were best mates from school, and he was in another band, and I was buddies with all of them. And he left that band, and wanted to start a new one, but I had no one to do it with him. So he turned to me and he said, "Do you fancy starting a band?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I don't know how to play an instrument." I turned around to him and I ended up just literally buying a bass guitar, and he taught me on the go. So all the songs I learned were our own ones. So I didn't know how to play it any other way. I'd have to write my own lines instead of copying someone else's. So, and then on top of that, it was, I did a bit of backing vocals as well. And I don't profess to be the greatest singer in the world, but we had fun with it. Again, we had again another mate of ours on drums who had not played the drums in years. He then picked it back up and became awesome in like a period of time. Fantastic. So they very much carried me in many ways. but yeah, it was a good occasion. I really loved it. I got to see the UK. It was fun for a time, and then obviously you don't make any money with bands, unfortunately. So I knocked it on the head as I moved in with my girlfriend, who I met back in 2011. She's now my wife. So I moved in with her, and then eventually, obviously, work took over. Then it was a few years down the line, and then commentary came into the picture. So it was, crazy journey.
No, absolutely. Well, often, some of our guests, we ask, what would you be if you weren't ... So if you weren't a motorsport commentator, what do you think you'd be doing now?
Oh, I would probably be still working at Tata Steel. I'd probably say. I worked in the steel industry since 2016. And I was working. I actually worked that job coinciding with my first year in commentary with GT Open. So what I was doing was working Mondays till Thursdays, taking the Friday off so I could travel to the circuit, and then come back early Monday morning at say 3 a.m. and then go straight to work. So I did that for the best part of 8 months until it got to the point where I was like, no way. I can't do this anymore. So yeah, don't get me wrong. Tata Steel were very accommodating. They turned to me and said, "Listen, we can narrow your days down to 3 days a week." And I said to my boss, I said, "Listen, I can't. I honestly can't. I'd feel like I'm doing you a disservice. I'd feel like I'm taking a mick, and at the same time, it's not really a way to manage the business, because at that time, managing accounts, for example, like I was doing, it required to be there every day, and it wouldn't have worked." So I turned around to them and said, "Listen, you need to find someone else to replace me, and I'll leave." And so I gave my notice, and from then on, I just stayed in commentary full time. So it was, it was. I mean, don't get me wrong, that was a huge leap of faith. I mean, it could have gone belly up for all I would have known, but it's strange. I probably would still be doing that, I would think.
And is that Tata plant down in Port Talbot? I'm just trying to think where
it's sort of Lamworn I was based, which is in just outside Newport, so it's not far away. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
We have the rail lines to Port Talbot, so the coil would be transported from the mill in the hot mill in Port Talbot, and it would arrive in Lamworn, where we would decoil it on site into sheet metal, into plate, and then sell 2-ton packs of plate to local businesses or businesses all around the UK. Like we did Jaguar Land Rover for many years, and JCB as well. So yeah, it's good.
You see, guys, you don't get the steel industry, broken down like you do on Georgie's Stripping the Dipping podcast. I mean, it's really interesting to hear what you might have been doing, what you were doing, and where you've got to. Could you tell us a little bit about your aspirations? So this sounds like you're still loving what you're doing. Do you have a sense of where you might want to go next?
I would love to do Formula One. I mean, if I can, at this point, I'll be honest, I've got to the point where I could never have imagined this, to be honest. So, I mean, I said to my wife, I said, "Listen, if someone was to turn around to me and say, George, this isn't going any further. This is it. You've had your day." I'd be like, "Great, I'll go and become a postman." If that's the case. But yeah, honestly, no, I would love. The way I also look at it is the fact that I've got this far, and I don't see any reason why I can't go further. Personally, that's my logic. I mean, I think doing this was unfathomable in the first place. It seems to be an industry that I revel in. I enjoy it. I love it. Why not shoot for the stars and go for the big job, and do what my hero did years ago. That would be probably the ultimate dream. I can consider myself somewhat fortunate in a way because I got to do the F1 Sim Racing Championship, and I do that. So, I mean, that was a huge moment doing that for the first time. Honestly, when Alex Jakes contacted me and said, you're going to be doing the F1 Sim Racing Championship, and other people got involved as well. You should have seen me. I got the call when I was in the airport, coming back from Red Bull Ring. I was stood there, and all of a sudden I could see this phone ringing, unknown phone number, and I don't really answer unknown calls, so it was quite a weird one actually. But I answered it, and they said, "George," and they said, "Would this is your big chance? Would you like to would you like to commentate the F1 Sim Racing Championship?" I was like, "Hell yeah!" So yeah, it was honestly, I couldn't believe it. It was a hyperventilating moment, but yeah, F1, big job. That's the one we want.
Yeah, let's reach for the stars. And as you
Yeah.
say, there's no reason why if you've got to where you've got to, you can't get there, which is fantastic. So you're going to be in Monza this weekend, is that right?
Yeah, off to the Temple of Speed this weekend. It's the grand finale of the International GT Open and GT Cup Open as well, Euroformula. Euroformula's already concluded. Brad Benavides won the title, so congratulations to him. But we have championships, like main overall championships, up for grabs in GT Open and GT Cup. So yeah, it's going to be a huge weekend. There are a couple of Italian teams that have a chance to get a championship crown, and if they do it at Monza, I'm sure that's going to be some moment. So yeah, I'm expecting fireworks. I'm expecting fireworks this weekend. Yeah.
And does it start to quieten down for the winter? Have you got some big trips planned, or how's it looking for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I'm going to be busy. I think I've got a couple of things lined up in December. I'm waiting for, obviously, things to be unveiled. I mean, it's pretty well known. I'm currently doing the Ferrari HP Esports series at the moment, which is fantastic. We've got some, really deep, incredible young up and coming talents from across the globe that are going to be heading to Abu Dhabi, Ferrari World Yas Island, Abu Dhabi, to compete for a Ferrari drive, to get a spot on the Ferrari HP Esports team. So, yeah, I'm excited about that. I'm going to be leading the commentary on that one. And yeah, that's going to be next on the list. And who knows? We're obviously waiting to hear as to what happens with the F1 Sim Racing Championship, among many other things. So hopefully that'll drop soon. And aside from that, it's going to be back to the motorsport world then come the new year.
Well, we'll be recording this, just the audio, but I'm looking at George right now and I see a little twinkle in his eye. Maybe there's something he can't tell us about 2025, or there's something in the works. I don't know. I just get that mischievous grin, but we'll see.
Oh, I hope so.
Fingers crossed. Talk to your agent, but don't, you're not in charge of the price, okay?
Yeah. No, she's honestly, I'm very thankful to them because we're, Loudspeaker Agency took, I would say they took a gamble on me. A guy from Wales who probably didn't know his arse from his elbow, to be truthful. If we're allowed to drop expletives like that on here, but yeah, it's kind of, it was a big step to obviously jump in and take on an industry like this with little to zero experience really at that level. Obviously, don't get me wrong, league racing broadcasting teaches you perhaps the fundamentals, but there's everything else on top of it when it's a real life situation, and I've had the opportunity to have my work shown on CBS and Fox and Sky Sports F1 and all of that, which it's enough for me to tell the grandkids anyway. So it's when that happens. I haven't got grandchildren yet, so don't panic. But yeah, I mean it's fabulous, and I'm very thankful. Gemma Louise and Gemma Scott and Louise Beckett have been absolutely fantastic for me, and they are well experienced in what they do. They've been part of the industry for so many years, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be working with Loudspeaker, and they've worked wonders.
As we draw to a close, could you tell us where our listeners can follow your exploits, see where you're going next?
Yeah, of course. I got social media. It's all the same tag @George Morgan TV. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I'm also streaming on Twitch from time to time. I enjoy a little bit of sim racing myself, so I do a little bit of iRacing. I did a little bit today, actually. So yeah, enjoy that. And obviously, if they fancy people like a bit of league racing, they can tune into PSGL on a Wednesday evening. And also, don't miss out on the GT Open at the end of the week as well. I'm not sure when this comes out. It might be after Monza, but either
We'll
way.
have to rush the editing now to get it out, for continuity's sake. So thanks, George.
Oh,
Brilliant.
sorry
No,
about
I'm joking. And any final messages for our listeners? Anything you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I would say, I suppose, and this is going to sound really, I don't know, really fairy tale-y or something. I'm not sure how to define it. But never give up. Is truthfully the my message to everybody. Just pursue the dream. Just because it seems unobtainable when you're young doesn't mean to say it isn't always going to be unobtainable. There are methods. If you're passionate, if you love it, somehow great things can happen. So don't ever count yourself out. Is what I will say.
And I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat. That's brilliant, George.